In today's podcast, I am delighted to be joined by former professional snooker player turned full-time bettor and tipster, Craig Edwards. Craig, welcome to the show. It's great to have you on. How are you doing?
Yeah, good to be on, Pete. Thanks. Busy week with the snooker and 2 or 3 golf events this week. So pretty flat out and all good here.
Great. Yeah, well, we like to be busy, especially with lots of things to bet upon this week on the 2 sports that you focus on, golf and snooker. And I want to talk about snooker first of all, because as I mentioned, you're a former professional snooker player. For those people not familiar with you or aware of your snooker career, talk me through your early years as a snooker pro and then perhaps how betting started to come into the conversation.
Yeah, so I qualified to be a pro in about 88. So I left the midway through my A-levels, and there was 128 pros at the time on the circuit. I think within 2 seasons I was in the top 64. Back then, though, there was only 6 or 8 ranking events a year. So I got to the Crucible one year, last 32 of the World Championship in 91. My best performance was the last 16 of the European Open, losing to Steve Davis 5-4 when he was world number 1 and world champion. I was 4-3 up, had one chance to win, and my bottle went a little bit and lost position around the blue, and that was that. Yeah, I got to the end of my snooker career, dropped out the top 64 and took the chance to go into the family business. At that time, snooker was becoming quite a young man's sport, and it's developed differently now to what people thought it would then. So I took that opportunity, and obviously growing up around snooker in a snooker club, every day was a betting day. I mean, at 16, I'd be in the bookmakers. You probably shouldn't say it now. In the afternoon, and quickly learnt odds, bets. I wasn't a particularly good punter at the time, I must say, though very shrewd guys around the snooker circuit, and you quickly pick up some nuances. Certainly back then it was around horse racing. A lot of people had, well, not a lot of people, the right people in snooker had the inside track to Michael Stout's, McShannon's, Kumar Nijad, and that got me interested. Kind of nice having an edge at that point. And you could see you had an edge because, you know, when you're back in high rise in its opening handicap and it goes on to win the Derby 2 runs later, you realise that it had about 2 stone in hand. And, you know, little things like that. Snooker club I was at was Ray Edmonds, who used to commentate for BBC, world amateur champion, owned horses. Very, very shrewd punter himself. So probably picked up a fair few good traits there at that point without knowing it, if you know what I mean.
And then I understand you were a chauffeur and that gave you a lot of downtime to actually spend researching and placing bets.
Yeah, so after I'd in the family business for over 10 years, and then we sold out, and I went to being a chauffeur for a businesswoman, local businesswoman. It was the perfect job for me. Nice income, drove her to where she had to go, and then probably 6 to 8 hours on the tablet, studying form, nicking the place's Wi-Fi. And I'd already honed my skills prior to that when I was in the business, but that was really when I honed my skills around sports betting in the straight after the millennium, and really started to bet properly then for profit, and started to lose accounts even back then. I think Stan James account I hit really hard once because I'd taken Ronnie O'Sullivan to beat Stephen Hendry 17-3, I think, in the semi-finals. I'd taken all the scores from 17-0 to 17-6, and they were paying double everyone else. And that was a nice 500 to 1 shot. And that killed that account, Stan James. That was kind of the start of it, really.
Okay. So at what point did you start to almost make a living from your betting, or to a point where, you know, you could combine it with other income and it was a serious proposition for you?
I was already probably making a second income throughout my shop years from some of the information from the horses. And then I took a keen interest in golf betting. And then I got to know it, reading Keith Elliott's books. At the time, Jeremy Chapman was the guy with the Racing Post. And nowadays, I think he does it. It's all pretty easy. He does the top of the market. But back then, he was pretty clever. And, you know, you learn a lot. You know, you definitely, and then I read Keith Elliott's book and the snooker book I did last year. When I look back on it now, there's a lot of Keith's ideas that I've enhanced with my knowledge of professional sport and how players' mindsets are affected by, whether it be results, previous results, personal circumstances. So I think that evoked in me a way of applying it to the psychology that I understood. Because a big factor in my sports betting on that particular week, I am preempting golfer or a snooker player's frame of mind. I obviously get plenty wrong, but if you can preempt their frame of mind, and then you have got an advantage from the bookmaker because they cannot see it, and it is only my theory. So, like I say, it doesn't work every time. But a golfer, I knew from playing snooker. So snooker's a 12x6 table. I'd be travelling back to Pontins in Prestatyn, where they filmed on the buses for the snooker tournament every year. And every year I did well. 700-800 players. I'd get to the final 3 times. And just travelling back, I was already, my endorphins and my biorhythms were already in tune. So when I took my QH case to practice, my hand-to-eye coordination was already playing well. So that if you apply that into golf, and you see it where those guys with marvellous course form snap a run of really poor form. And, obviously, if you've had a little indicator that they are running into form, then that's even better. But these hand-to-eye coordination sports, I think that's what people never realise about golf and snooker is that definitely they are 80% conservatively in the mind. The players have all practiced. They all play pretty perfectly in practice, to be honest. I think Neil Fold said it yesterday on the snooker. Sanderson Lamb, he said, if you went to snooker club, you would think he was Judd Trump practicing. But some players take it, some players don't. And, that is all determined very much from mindset and learnt behaviour.
So your background as a professional, that must obviously give you a real advantage there. You can see perhaps body language or certain aspects of how they're setting up at snooker, for example. You can see areas of weakness or strength that you can take advantage of.
Yeah, I think in snooker, you can see the way they play position, whether players are ducking a shot slightly, ducking. There's always a phrase in snooker, the commentators use a lot, which says, the balls come back, never forgive you, come back to haunt you. And that's because you've played the wrong shot. You've played the wrong shot.
Yeah.
And it is the most peculiar. It's at times you actually feel like the balls have their own mind. And of course, I did play around the time of playing snooker. My dad brought me up playing golf. My dad was a scratch player. I played to single figures when I was a young man. And I played with a lot of single figure players. I got a feel for what was needed in both sports. Although I was good at golf, I was a lot better at snooker.
I see. Yes. And I understand you're quite good at poker as well. So it seems that you have the psychological side of it down quite well. Yeah. From on the mindset and understanding these nuances that you can't get from just looking at data, which presumably a lot of bookmakers are basing their prices on.
Oh, it's hilarious. I mean, I was on Twitter yesterday and Mark Williams was travelling to Scotland to play and he'd put moaning about his train journey. And,
I saw that.
yeah. And all that lot. But it's all Mark Williams being psychological. One of my members come, what do you think he's going to go? I said, yes, he'll go. He'll be fine. And he is a past master at taking the pressure off himself and bringing it onto the other players and also getting a read on them. And I don't know if you watch poker, but Daniel Negreanu was someone that used to do that at poker and when he played live. And Mark Williams last year had been posting he'd got gout and it was the worst he'd ever played and he won the British Open the same week.
Yeah.
He's a master of psychology and that was brought in from being around Ray Reardon, who was the real master of psychology in snooker. He'd be laughing, smiling, but at that crucial juncture in a match, he would bury you.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. And of course, the ones that do it nicely like that, with that nice thread of gamesmanship, but not kind of in your face, they are often the cleverer ones, even like bettors. If someone tells you they're winning X amount of money in life and it's that easy, it never is it?
No.
So you tend to find the quiet ones are always the worst, I always think. And I digressed a bit from talking about making a second income or making money betting, but I think it is combined because I've never believed that people have always called me a professional gambler. And when for years people followed me, people I knew on snooker, on spread bets and golf, but I've always done it as a second income. I've never done it as my only form of income. I've had to do it as my only form of income a couple of times for a few months, and I've not enjoyed it. Even though I've won, it's made me slightly negative in my process. So, of course, understanding the psychology of sport, that psychology then comes into being a tipster and finding that right balance. And, of course, tipping, you're going to have plenty of elongated break-even runs or even a poor run. Plenty of times on my service now. I mean, I've got over 8,000 bets. There's been several times I've had like 60 losers on a trot. And so you have to keep it into some kind of perspective. It's easier to do that if you can absorb them financially poor junctures with really not even looking at your betting account, really, and just carrying on with your discipline.
And so having the tipping service allows you to have that balance whereby you're betting and you're betting substantial figures and you're doing well from it, but it takes that pressure off to a certain extent whereby if you had that 60 losing run, you are still going to be able to pay the bills that month, because people understand the variance that is at play, the subscribers understand your long-term profitability and will ride that wave with you.
Yeah, I think the best subscribers are the ones that have been with you a long time and they just absorb it in the same way you do. Because they've been doing it for so long, they also probably don't feel that sense of panic. It's easy for me saying I don't feel that sense of panic. I do sometimes, I panic more for my subscribers than I do myself. It's kind of keeping them reins and that discipline can be very difficult because in the short term, you always have to be almost indifferent to your results. You can only really look at them as the sample gets bigger because, when you look back, then you find, God, I did that. Did I do that? And it's ever evolving art, isn't it?
Of course. Yeah. You probably I look at articles or things I did a few years ago and I think, well, I can improve on that. Or I think a little bit differently to it. It's interesting you say that you've got long-term subscribers that are with you. And I'd love to talk about the service as well. And obviously we've published a review on your service and like say there's over 8,000 bets. There's a lot to analyze. It's got some really good figures. I'm going to say that, 26% ROI advice prices down to even a 7% at your minimum odds over that period. So we've got a really good sample size and some good figures there. But I'm intrigued how you got into the tipping world as well. Do you want to explain that process? It almost feels like you fell into it rather than it was something you sought out.
Totally fell into it, to be truthful with you. So I kind of, through the contacts I'd made, I'd always been quite friendly with a few tennis tipsters. And one of them, Deal, he'd started a tipping service, Tipsters Club. And he said, will you come and do snooker and golf for me? And I'll sort out all the admin and what have you. And he pushed it really well. He did do all that thing really well. And I got started. And I didn't have a lot of admin at the time. I'd just send my tips, my staking. Didn't have to worry about it. Funnily enough, I didn't know a year later I would be made redundant. Although I did get the feeling that my boss was starting to struggle.
Yeah.
So I was doing it just as a bit of love, labour of love, and trying to help him start, really. So he made a mess of things. I'm not going to go into recriminations because we've sorted it out between us since. And, I've got a lot of respect for him for the way he handled that in the end. So I said to him, look, I'm going to leave on this particular day and I'm going to put a notice on Twitter that if you show me your receipt from PayPal, I will honour your commitments and I'll send them from my private email box just to honour the commitments. Because I was betting every week. I'd be betting the snooker, betting the golf. At that point, I wasn't even thinking about making money doing it. So I think he had at least 20, I think maybe 30 subscribers. And they all came with me. And quickly, he had priced it quite dear at the time. I didn't think it was that great from a pricing point of view, but I suppose he was thinking he was going to pay us both. So from that, immediately I had people then I'd put on Twitter, Tipster out or something. I'd not even branded it. It come out. I started getting people approaching me. Well, how much does it cost for a year? Can I do it? So obviously word of mouth had spread around the internet amongst a few people. And I suppose it's a few of the right faces. So that was start of October. By December, I talked with James at Tennis Pal, and he was good enough, him and his brother, to build me a website, do some spreadsheets. Just marvellous, because I'm a bit of a technophobe. They were already up and running, and, his help was, just launched it on that kind of January the 1st. And that's it. That was the start of 19. I started 18 in the March of the 18, and it grew steadily. I would say it's had quite a few peaks and then a couple of troughs it's gone back to, but it's quite a steady service. I found that this last year, I've got probably more long-term subscribers than I've ever had, and a good retention rate with them as well. So that's kind of pleasing. And, it's been a nice little service. I've really quite enjoyed it. And if I'd known that I joined a couple of tipping services prior, I think I joined Money Bag Tips or something that did rugby union. They were a fantastic brand.
Yeah.
And if I'd have known that tipping was so lucrative, I'd have probably done it years prior.
Yeah.
I was just a bettor myself. Obviously, I kind of knew the right people. And then it kind of just went from there. And I suppose I've been really lucky that I've been able to do two sports to a high level. So I've got snooker, and snooker complements the golf very much because they're lower prices. You can balance people's bankroll and allow their bankroll, hopefully, not to have many real dips. And I think that's really helped me over the years, because obviously golf is a marvellous return on investment long term. But I've had 1 year, golf outright, of only being break even, Pete.
Yeah.
So, and that's showing a ridiculous margin over the time because, we've had so many 3-figure winners. But equally, being able to balance people's bankroll and so that they don't feel those kind of lulls is hopefully it's something that's, attracted them and just enabled them to bet without too much stress.
Yeah. It seems to be such a well-run service. As someone that we've been proving for a while now, since earlier this year. Regular emails, there's a structure, it's a consistency, whether it be staking, the type of selections, the type of markets you target, all adds up and makes a lot of sense. And I think that helps when perhaps you're having a losing run, or, when it comes to golf, you're going to bat significantly more losers than you are winners, especially in the outright market, to give you that patience and kind of knowledge and faith that the person in question has a distinct edge. And I want to talk about, because, obviously you developed, you mentioned before, people talking on the internet. And it wasn't just punters that joined your service, was it? You had some incident with bookmakers joining and changing the odds. Are you comfortable to talk about that today?
Yeah, it is what it is. I'd like them to prove me wrong anytime. It's kind of, I think you asked me a good question, like, what about minimum odds? And it wasn't until I thought back that I'd stopped doing minimum odds in 2020 because I'd picked up a couple of spy subscribers from a major firm. And at first I thought, I can't have. No, they're not going to bother. Not going to bother subscribing to my services, And then, of course, I got two of my subs says to me, yeah, they are. They're going within 4 minutes. So then I watch, because I always get my bets on first. Yeah. And I try not to move the markets because I've got different accounts. So any case, I started timing it, and the golf place model, which had been marvelous in the early days, in 2019 and 2018, I don't think people realised how lucrative golf place betting was at that point, and then markets had gone untapped. There was a couple of good services targeting them, to be fair. I think there was Golf Insiders and a couple of others. But they were really the core of making profit at that time. And the bookmakers had it carte blanche. So the bookmakers, because punters would only look at the top of the market, they'd crush the top of the market and you could get any price you wanted down below. So prior to COVID, averaged it out that there'd be 6 to 8 200 to 1 shots finishing in the top 20 in the PGA Tour. And it worked very similar in the European Tour. It's a bit more erratic. It wasn't against you. And of course, to a place model, that's very relevant. And at that time, a 200 to 1 shot, most firms were letting you have him at 7 to 1, 8 to 1 in the top 20 place. Now that margin's been skimmed back. Now that margin's come back to very much, they're setting them at 6 to 1 because they were exploited. And I picked up that. And when I picked up the spies, basically the price was gone below the minimum within 4 minutes. And then subscribers would say to me, what do I do? It's gone below. Created me a real problem. So I decided to go away from that. And obviously, if a long-term subscriber comes to me, knows how far it's dropped. Because the main service always puts their prices up. And at that time, they were very exploitable. But by the time I finished with them, and then probably a couple of other services, they reined their prices back in for 2020. They were tight. That firm, I'm insinuating, were the lowest price pretty much across the board. And even in 21, it's only this last year that they've widened their range again, and they've totally widened it.
Well, a lot of bookmakers are offering different markets now, aren't they? Enhanced odds, not just offering, the first 5 at a quarter or the first 8. They're offering all kinds of different markets where you can tailor the place terms and the number of places you want, and not just the odds. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the strength of anyone that does something well is often their weakness. So my strength very much is that I will make assessments of a player, and that player, like in golf, a lot of players are far more comfortable earning checks than they are being in contention.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong in that. I'm not saying it. You've had like people like Charlie Howell have made, 40 million or something? Was it? I think it was more in prize money without really being at the top end of tournaments. But they're very exploitable for what we need in place betting. Those type of players. Of course, the odd one will win, but I think I've only had 1 or 2 win on my service of like 2,500, 3,000 tips. So when I've put them for place only, that's where they've finished. They've never won the tournament. And of course, a player's proclivity changes, players develop. So I have to develop. So I can't just say that he's never going to win, because sometimes that penny drops, and it drops big style. I mean, Padraig Harrington was not much of a winner in his early career on the Open Tour. He's mighty consistent, but he found it difficult. But then he won 3 majors in a 2-year period. From a winning perspective, he's still competing on the main tour.
Yes.
Now, currently, Tony Finau, he went ridiculous amount of tournaments after winning in South America early in his career. And now the penny's dropped, hasn't it?
Yeah, it was a bit of a figure of fun. Tony Finau's never going to win kind of thing. Yeah, the bridesmaid.
Yeah. So a fair amount, percentage of that will be in the player's mind. There will be a little bit of variance as well, because we talk about variance in betting. You got a variance as a sportsman. Your variance is whether you're unlucky or unlucky by the players you play on that particular day. You could have a player fall apart. So there's lots go into it, but I wasn't looking at Tony Finau to win tournaments for the last 2 or 3 seasons. And he's my anti-post bet for next year's Masters suddenly, because the penny's dropped. He's obviously got the class. His ball striking gets him in position.
The pressure's off as well, isn't it? The pressure's off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, the pressure flips, doesn't it, in the end? And it flips then to the players that are almost expected to beat him. So that's difficult. So like every week, you almost have to rate a player. Are they progressing? Are they going to start thinking like they can win a tournament? Are they working with the sports psychologist to unlock them things in the mind? Sportsmen talk about being in the moment. It's no different to being a bettor, but it's easier to say than actually do, to stay in that moment and play the shot on its particular merits. But that is the way to your sporting success. That is the holy grail. I mean, I struggle to do it. So I have a lot of empathy. When I see people putting that someone's a choker on social media and all this lot, I can't read it, because it's just, I feel like saying, well, what do you do for a living?
Yeah, it's easy. It's easy when you're pontificating from your armchair to make those statements. Yeah.
It's not exactly a loser's lifestyle, is it?
It can't be too bad, especially if you're on some of the new tours that are coming up, the Live Golf and what have you. I just wanted to round back actually to the issue we talked about, the bookmaker, because it's interesting. I was going to say Hugh Taylor is obviously at the races racing tipster.
Yeah.
And one of the questions he put was, why don't I put minimum odds? Well, he said, well, if I put minimum odds up, the bookmakers are just going to slash it to under that. So if he says don't take lower than 5-1, they're all going to be 9-2 in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And that's part of the issue. And I know you don't put minimum odds now, but that was one thing with that particular bookmaker, wasn't it? Where you had to basically remove them from the service. And that's why now you just tell people, look, don't take lower than a certain percentage lower than the odds themselves.
On my email, you kind of confirmed this. I do have a little phrase that's kind of, it's giving you an idea where not to go below, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, but it's not prescriptive. It's not going to say don't take less than 5-1 because of that particular issue. But it speaks to your service, doesn't it? It speaks to your expertise and your reputation, I suppose, that your bookmakers would join. And I also wanted to go back to one of the things you said there about dealing with other markets, because you might have from my understanding, you work backwards through a tournament. So most people are going to look, oh, Rory's the favourite. Who's second favourite? Who's third favourite? You're going backwards. You're going, who's 2,000 to 1 and down, trying to identify those. That might be a really big price. And obviously, if you find a guy who's 500 to 1, that should be 100 to 1. Now, he's still a 1% chance to win. But then if you can take him in different markets, let's say you take him in a top nationality market where maybe there's only 12 players, or you take him in a top 20 market, you have that much more opportunity for that bet to actually win. And there you might only get 2 or 3 at big prices, as you said, but you will often get a lot at some of those sub-markets, which is part of your advantage, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit pedantic working it backwards, but you do learn about the players also. So if you have to research players, then you're kind of putting that in your memory bank as well. And you're starting at the beginning. And I find it difficult to say that Rory McIlroy's value this week when he isn't the week after. I understand it. I can read all the rationale and there's plenty do it. But it's got to be easier to theorise that a 500 to 1 shot is 100 to 1 and an 80 to 1 shot is a 40 to 1 shot than it ever is to theorise that Rory McIlroy at 10 to 1 this week is a better price than he was at 8 to 1 last week. And it gives you more room for error. And like you say, Pete, you can spread that into the other markets. You're not necessarily expecting them to win the tournament. I'm a great believer that young players can win tournaments at the start of their career, and they can win any tournament. I mean, we just saw it last weekend with Dan Bradbury, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
You know, because they have, people say it's youth, but I think it's almost an ignorance of youth, for want of a better word than ignorance, because you don't know what you do. You kind of just do it because you've been doing it so far in your career. You're not really thinking about it very much. I remember seeing someone put on Twitter that they thought that Martin Kamer was so good early in his career, and they put, for want of a better word, because he was thick. And he is thick. Now, thick is the wrong word because he's not thick. He's a marvellous player. And I loved him as a closer. Loved him. But when he blew Abu Dhabi from 8 or 9 shots in front on the back 9, his career's been over since at the highest level. That's because he started to think about it. Before, he was closing events. He was just aggressive in the moment, closing them. He closed the US Open. He closed the Players impressively. But he's never recovered. And that goes to show that not all players develop mentally. Some do, like we talked about Padraig Harrington, Tony Finau, but some players regress. So a youthful player has that almost youthful ignorance of the pressure around them almost, and can take advantage of those that are suffering from it, or just play. So, I mean, I think last week Bradbury played, he's chasing down by Valimaki, Beazenhout and Van Tonder. And that those 3 players are in my top 20 on the European Tour for players likely to close an event, because there's plenty on the European Tour that aren't, but those 3 are. So he's being pursued by 3 of the best closers currently. He just outplayed him. He just played the ball, played the next shot perfectly, job done. And it just fascinates me. You just can't help the human mind, can you?
No, playing his natural game, off the phrase that you hear in other sports, just not letting your mind be clouded by doubts or well, when I did this last time, I choked or whatever.
Yeah. Or actually even saying to yourself, I choked, even admitting it, that might be wrong. That might be the first steps to failure. So when I said to you earlier that I choked the chance against Steve Davis, was that me on the first steps to failure when I should be looking at it more positively? It's no big deal if you choke. It's a terrible word, isn't it? But if your nerve goes in the moment, it's no big deal. You're under pressure. You shouldn't beat yourself up over it.
Look at the next one.
Yeah. And lots of players do. They pick themselves up, and they do. But that's all part of almost psychologically profiling players, which is what I do. Some players never will pick themselves up, but others, well, there's the few that will just, see the backside, just say, I'm not doing that again. And, it's kind of 6 to 1, half a dozen the other. But I think it's fascinating how good young players are, why they're not really aware of it.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously, you think very deeply about all the sports you're invested in, and you bet in and you tip in. How much work then goes into it? I understand that you probably start on a Sunday, start to analyse some of the markets, obviously assuming there might not be snooker tournaments taking place.
Yeah.
talk me through the amount of work and research that you actually do and how it is. You might get an email as a subscriber, but there's a lot of thought that's gone into that.
Yeah, so first thing I do is kind of each year I build up my spreadsheet of the form on the course, and obviously some weeks you have new courses, it becomes irrelevant. But in that, I'll also make notes about the player's score. It looks bad, but it wasn't that bad. They just fell apart in the last 9 holes at the final day, something like that, But they'd played the course perfectly for the first 7/8 of it, sort of thing. And I'll make notes, little notes like that. So then when I open it up next year, I think, oh yeah, and that gives me a bit of profile, a bit of thinking how I'm thinking. Then from that, I've already got a list of players suited. Then I run through the list again of the entries and then establish a list of players that I'm interested in at the prices. Look at the top of the market, look who's going to be favourites. And then from that, it's a twofold thing. Basically, are they opposable? Do they look weak favourites? There was a period in golf where Jordan Spieth was a terribly weak favourite, but the bookmakers were scared of him. I'm a great believer that Rory is a pretty weak favourite in general terms, and his price is always under his chance. And got to make a decision on that. So then you fetch in the kind of prices. You can see the players' entries, and then you can fetch in the price range that you're expecting them players at. And then you've got to theorise then how often they would win that tournament on that week's dynamics. They're coming in with X amount of form. They like the course. There might have been something happen in their personal life, but you're putting it all together from them old notes. And so some weeks I'll have a really nice tight list. Some of the events, the Players' Championship, some of the long-standing events have quite a nice tight list. And then I have a nice secondary list with players that I think are going to be suited, show me enough. And from that, I kind of work out what price I'm wanting to bet them at, an approximate price. And, I do that all on the Sunday pretty much. And then I'm already thinking about it. And when I'm thinking about it on the Sunday, I'm looking how they've played that particular week, or if they haven't played that week, how they've played in the previous weeks. And then on the Monday morning, I run through it again, but then briefly. And, I kind of wrote down my list, what sort of prices I'm going to be happy with. For the win each way market, I'm looking at players I think can win the tournament. But there's also each way value. You have a lot of players that are very good at finishing in the each way places. For whatever reason, I don't know whether it's variance or what it is. I don't know whether it's bizarre, isn't it? Golf form.
I think of Corey Connors, for example. He seems to be someone who perennially finishes in the places, but
yeah,
one of those players that you often get a payout for, but perhaps not quite good enough to win.
I mean, it's amazing. I mean, Joachim Lagergren on the European Tour, I think he's been in the top 5 4 times in the Dunhill. Whether he's come in form or not, his form previous has never mattered. It's a rotation event, but that horse course is one of the most exceptional examples you'll ever have. Or he's an event specialist even, isn't he?
Yeah, every year. I remember seeing about him every year at that course, yeah.
Yeah, so every year I can get 100 to 1. You're just going to bet him every time until he gets to 40 and he can't play anymore. And hopefully he'll save you money then. But some people try and second guess it, but because he's been placed 3 times, they think he can't be placed again. And I've got to say on my service, I think 3 of the occasions I've had him. But if I've backed him all 5 of the occasions I've been tipping at 100 to 1 plus, my subscribers are well in profit, so it's, I don't know. On the one hand, golf form can be the easiest thing. It can be the most frustrating. And
yeah.
I mean, I always remember my first real lesson in golf form was Kirk Triplett at the Riviera Country Club. And he had got some marvellous form, but he was winless on the PGA Tour. I took him at the time. I think not many firms were betting top 20 at the time. I mean, this is in the 90s. He was 100 to 1. And all you could do was bet him at 100 to 1. I think there was one firm betting top 20. I managed to get on him, but it's quite a prohibitive price in comparison to the 100 to 1. And he won the event. It was his first tournament win. He'd had how many 100 starts without a win in his career. I don't think I'd take that bet now. Strangely, I'd just take him in the place markets probably. But it is the strangest phenomenon ever. But the one thing you do know is that when a player has that particular affinity with the track, you must respect it because they relax that little bit more that week. They just kind of have that all them positive memories to draw off. That is huge. That is huge in the sport.
No, that's really interesting. That's obviously your angle as well, particular expertise, as we talked about there. Your ability to see perhaps what others can't see quite as easily based on your experience as a sportsman, certainly. I was going to say you're betting early in the week and late in the week because it's important to say that obviously you're taking some early bets Sundays and into Mondays mostly and then some Tuesday. But obviously on Wednesday you have a recap golf email. And of course there's exceptions, especially if a golf has been well backed. But there are often you can get the equivalent but not sometimes better odds on the exchange markets at that point when they become a little bit more liquid, can't you? So it is a service whereby you can do well with bookmakers, but there is that opportunity for people that perhaps don't have all the accounts they might wish for, or even if just limited to mainly exchanges.
Yeah, and I think I know that from feedback it appeals to both. I mean, I think as a tipster for my sports, a subscriber is going to profit if they have a Bet365 account.
Mm-hmm.
There's just no getting away from that. They cover snooker well. The compiler on snooker is excellent. He's improved out of all proportion. They do, and they obviously cover golf well nowadays. And, the multiple place markets choices means that I like to get them early nuggets of value from my tissue. And, you'll know yourself that I'll put a player up when only Bet365 are priced. Quite happy to back my own judgment on the price. And I get the odd one wrong. I'm not saying I get them all right, but I must get that instinct for the price must be 80% right for me, at least. I'm very often, some of my subs are getting someone at 80 to 1. He finishes the week 50 to 1. And especially if he's been tipped up by one of the major tipsters, that'll just keep the price battened down. But for the others, sometimes you get to the Wednesday and, I think you can say that 80% of my selections on the Wednesday in the win market are trading at 20% or more on the exchange win market.
Yeah.
So, you've got that option there. And as you know, some of them, the odd ones, will be trading at 100% more. 100 to 1 shot is 230 and stuff like that.
Easily, yeah. So obviously the market evolves too. So you'll get like data golf or other sources where people are highlighting value. So it does adapt and change. So yes, but generally you are seeing that, aren't you? Especially if you're taking the big price. If I get a chance as well, because I appreciate, I don't want to keep you too long today, but I wanted to ask you about snooker as well. We talked a lot about golf. Now, from snooker perspective, I grew up in the 80s and 90s. I remember snooker was on TV. A lot of the snooker players were household names, people on the street with who Dennis Taylor is or Steve Davis is. Whereas these days, perhaps my interpretation is that's not quite the same. And so from a betting perspective, is that lack of interest, is that reflected in the markets? Is it a little bit more difficult to get bets on, whether that be just bookmakers and how they use snooker or liquidity on the exchanges? Talk me through how the snooker betting market is currently.
Well, I'm always surprised there's not more liquidity on snooker matches because I know, snooker players like to bet and the people around snooker players are betting. There's the black market in China where there's huge sums of money bet on snooker.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. A lot of people I've known in the past have followed my advice on spread betting. Before I was a tipster, I did quite a bit of spread betting when I knew that things were wrong and they got the ratings wrong on players' ability to break build from a generic sense from the match line. I mean, one of the greatest examples of that was Mark Williams. Sometimes he had no interest in making 100 break. So you were quite safe. It's not the same now with him. But the exchanges can be very weak on snooker. The outright market's very weak. The match markets, once you get to television stages of Britain, like last week at the UK Championship, here again, they are a little bit more solid, but they are not as buoyant as golf markets. And so we do rely more on the bookmakers. But Bet365, definitely an excellent bookmaker as regards snooker. And there are more of them are mimicking their extra lines now, doing the high break, doing the centuries. I've actually managed to leave the side markets alone a little bit more this last year, actually deliberately, because I know I can always go back to them at times. But if I can create profit from the normal money line, highest break scorer and handicap, then, I can save them a bit more for the rainy day because there are some of their markets, the bookmakers generically price wrong any case.
Yeah. at big prices from what you're saying, you can really hit a big winner, but at the cost of your account, effectively.
Yeah, and you could, there's certain lines that you could actually back them on block. On certain rounds, 64 matches, you could back a couple of lines on block because bookmakers push them to punters, like I was talking about with the golf markets, pushing them to the top of the place markets and pushing them to overs and silly things. And when actually, statistically, punters are always getting way below the odds. So, you can take the other line in certain spots. I remember one morning I did a bet like that. The bookmakers just knocked it down straight away. So there's no point. It's just got no longevity for me. I might throw the odd one out there to people, especially if it's in a final and stuff. But, I need for my subs to be able to get on at a good price, a profitable price, really. So, it's a more niche market than golf. And, of course, you haven't got the outright winners. Oh, I've had quite a lot of outright winners on the snooker. You just haven't got the number of outright selections running for you. So it's a more smaller price range, but I have some really big bettors in the snooker world. Yeah, I'm always surprised because I grew up with betting around snooker. I'm always surprised the markets aren't more liquid than they are. I just haven't got the answer. Maybe my own narrow view of it isn't the actual view, if you know what I mean. But to me, snooker's still a great television sport, and it's a better televised sport than golf. If you put the both on the same Sunday evening and the snooker's a good final, you're going to find me watching the snooker.
Yeah,
I'll watch the golf on record and catch up with it because it's just, the coverage is better as well. I mean, that beats you down a bit, but it's more a niche thing. So a lot of my subscribers do have a genuine interest in snooker as a sport. But also, a lot of snooker players play golf and vice versa because it's that hand-to-eye coordination. A lot of golf professionals love snooker and a lot of snooker professionals love golf. There's quite a little bit of affinity between the two sports, really. But as regards betting, great fun, but it's never going to be as profitable long-term as golf. But, I have turned a nice profit over the years. So it's been, but this year, perfect example, first 6 months of the year were only break even, and that was with a good World Championship qualifying. It's only these last few weeks that I've really got on top of it for the year and, pushing the profit margin up towards 20%.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of still that variant, still that betting is, 10 steps forward, 8 back if you're lucky, 9 back usually, I think.
Good way to summarize it. Yeah. You've got a 15.17% ROI in snooker, that's advice prices, and 5.21% at min odds. Obviously, that's a little bit lower than the golf, but still, a very strong profit there over a substantial number of bets. But it's like I say, it's that trade-off against, you could probably take a whole load more markets and different types of bets and have a much more inflated ROI there, but who could actually get on? You'd be ruining the markets, and you might get on, but your subscribers won't, and then accounts will collapse and create those issues. So it's interesting to learn about that balance. And I've been enjoying reading about the snooker because I grew up with all those characters, and I do appreciate snooker as a televisual event. It's a great sport to watch, especially with the pressure and the hype, the intense nature of all these frames and the players and the characters in it. So, but it's great to hear about profits that you're making on those services and how you actually do it. I think you probably approach it a little bit differently to quite a few other tipsters, and everyone's a little bit different. So it's intriguing to hear about your approach. And I was also going to ask you, because wrap things up now, but I think because we've been chatting for a little while now, you do switch off. And I was going to ask you about, because you told me you're doing a master's in journalism.
Yeah.
You're trying to diversify even further. Talk me through the ideas behind why you're doing that and how you switch off from your betting, which seems to be really important for you to have a couple of days out.
It is important to me because, I think bettors can kind of have a bit of empathy with this. If you let betting take over your life and it becomes 7 days a week, your family suffers, people around you suffer. And mine will have suffered over the years at different times. But, I get to a Thursday now, don't really think about it. And I don't really put out many in-play golf bets. Sometimes before the final round, I need a few days off. And, usually one full day of them days off, I'm doing my this is masters. I've done undergraduate last 3 years and did my book from it. Luckily, the uni let me do that. But I like taking my mind into a different place other than sport. So, it is quite challenging. And I'm kind of regretting doing it full time as opposed to part time because I didn't realise it's going to be so intense this year. But I also like to forget about sports betting for a couple of days a week. You know, I have a few tipsters that I follow and I'll just put their bets on when they send me them. But I'm not looking at it. And, you know, my snooker stuff on a Thursday I'll catch up with because, you know, I'm looking to take my mind out of it. And then, you know, like Friday and Saturday, if I can, spend some time with the missus and the dogs. I mean, we've got 4 dogs. We had 10 at one point when the kids first left home and the missus got empty nest syndrome. It was kind of a bit manic, but it's great. I love the dogs. I think they kind of bring some balance into your life, it's just relaxing, really. I mean, when I see people struggling in life and with mental things, I want to say to them, you know, get yourself a dog.
Yeah,
dog.
Get out.
Yeah, you know, and kind of live a bit vicariously, I suppose. And I like stepping away from betting. I mean, I love it when I'm in it. I mean, it is what I do, but there's nothing more than I like than a holiday. We'll book. I always say to my members, you know, if you have a big win on the golf, do something with it. Book a holiday, buy a suite, buy a telly, do whatever. You know, kind of enjoy it rather than just get back into betting. You know, we do that. We struggle to get more than one holiday a year because we have to get our daughter home to be with the dogs. But, you know, in past years, we've, take a city break, Rome, trawling around all the ruins. I love that. But I also love cruising or, you know, just on a beach with a book.
Mm-hmm. But that time out's important.
Yeah, I think time out is important, especially for the mind, because it's burnout every day. When I'm looking at the snooker markets, the golf markets, I need some time not thinking about it because I do naturally think about it. If I look at something, I'm thinking about it and at that end of the week, the snooker's coming to its end and there's less bets any case because the players have already won 2 or 3 matches. They're playing well. They're playing to their rating. I haven't got the edge as the player comes to the end unless I see something. I'm struggling to have the edge that I had in the early rounds. And, you know, golf, yeah, I think I do miss a few things. Seen some really good in-play golf tipsters. Look at their particular players. They'll find something in a player on that particular round, and it's very true, you know, a big change. But you can't have it all, can you? My service is set to make people profit from the off. And on a Sunday, I do look because I'm looking at the golf markets. Sometimes there's fair few players that play well on payday on a Sunday. You know, if they're like in 40th, they can move through the places.
Yeah.
You know, they can be worth a look. But I'm not a believer. I always think that rounds 1 and 4 are bettable, but rounds 2 and 3, not so much because they are a bit more just random. Players are a bit more through the motions. They don't have the same level of pressure. The last round is the one with the real pressure. Dale Whitnell, last 2 years, it's just been from off the pace. He has earned a marvellous living on the European Tour because he's able to put together great last rounds. And you've got to be aware of that as a bettor, you know, players like that. And there's also other players that tend to put together a bit iffy last rounds and it's kind of cost them money. But it's that day, it's the pressure day, it's payday, isn't it?
Payday, yeah, for everybody. And it makes sense that you do need to have that breather, I think, as well, for the mindset. I feel like I've had that in the past and you can get quickly burnt out if you're doing it because it's 7 days a week, you know, this is betting. There's always something that you can bet upon. There's something that you can be interested in. So yeah, it's good advice.
Yeah, definitely. It's the problem is if you do it too much, you stop enjoying it. And, you know, it's kind of, then you quickly become results orientated, which of course, as I said, you know, in the short term, you can never be results orientated. You have to do your process, kind of believe in it. Your process is always evolving as well. You know, to let it evolve, you've got to let it breathe a bit. So you've got to have some time to reflect. You know, them days off, I'm saying I switch off, but you're still probably in the back of your mind often reflecting on stuff.
Or looking at Flash Score or wherever you.
Well, it's just depressing some week, isn't it? Looking at Flash Score and you just see double bogey. Oh, why did I look? You know,
I keep looking on a Thursday and I had 6 of the top 7 or something like that. I think here we go, it's my week, and then come Sunday, you know, there's no one on the top screen. No one had to scroll all the way down to find my golfers. Yeah.
It's crazy, isn't it? Some weeks you can start brilliantly. You can think, wow, I've got it cornered, and you get nowhere. Another week, you'll get a guy come out of nowhere. You one guy that makes the cut. And, you know, you've almost got to... I mean, sometimes it's quite funny because a member will text me and they'll say, have you seen how so-and-so's doing? Because I do genuinely try on a Friday and a Saturday really not to look at it. I sometimes dare say, well, no, I haven't really looked, because I'm actually trying not to look, but it's the hope that kills you on golf betting.
It is indeed. And well, I mean, your record stacks up, and both on golf and snooker, we've been really impressed by what we've seen at Smart Betting Club. Obviously, the review is available for people to read as Smart Betting Club members. There's a discount as well. I think it's 20% on yearly and 10% on 6 and 3 months. That can be found within the review. And for those people who want to find out more, do you want to fire out some links, whether it be a website or social media or emails, that kind of thing, people can get in touch?
Yeah, edwards/tips.co.uk.
Yeah, that's it. And there's contact links on there as well if people want to get in touch. And you're on Twitter. I'll slide all that in the show notes as well so people can find. Because, there's lots of good information there. You've got a really good spreadsheet, actually. It's been really helpful for our analysis point of view. But for people that want to, do their own due diligence, then I encourage them to look up that spreadsheet. You've got that available for people to look at. And there's some really good information on there.
It's a nightmare keeping it.
I'm sure it is. But from a perspective of a subscriber or a review service like ours, to actually see that just gives you that confidence, and like, this person is taking this extremely seriously.
Yeah.
And they keep it up to date regularly, and all the information on there. There's a lot to explore. I certainly appreciate that, certainly. So, Craig, thank you ever so much. I know we're recording this at the end of 2022, so I wish you the very best. I'm assuming your golf will take a bit of a hiatus, and then you'll get stuck in 2023. I know snooker will be busy over the Christmas period. I imagine that's normally, or is it darts mainly like these days? But
it's mainly darts. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to at least a couple of weeks off. Great stuff. But for those of you listening to this into 2023, go and check out the website. There's a full review. There's lots and lots to explore. So, Craig, I wish you all the best for 2023 and beyond. And I look forward to covering your service moving forward. Thanks, Pete. Thank you very much.
Thank you.